All right, today is a graduation service, and actually my title is No Such Thing as a Graduation. I want you guys to repeat after me, no such thing as a graduation. I remember the last time when I graduated from school, and that was close to about 15 years ago. Actually, I graduated from seminary, which is a training school for pastors, but to just kind of make it easier, I will use my example of my graduation from college. And as I was sitting in my graduation, it just occurred to me that I no longer will have to take tests again. And I no longer will have to do homework or assignments. And do you guys know how it felt? It felt pretty awesome. It felt really great. And I just felt this liberation of I no longer have to take tests or do my homeworks. And it was a great, great feeling. But I realized that you don't actually graduate from many things in life, although you may graduate from your school. There are some things that we never graduate from, and our faith is one of those things that we never graduate. You're never done with your faith, and in fact, you have to keep at it. You have to remain faithful for the rest of your life, and you have to continue growing. In our faith, there is no such thing as a graduation, and this is a lifelong learning and growing. We're going to read a few verses from the book of 2 Timothy chapter 3, and then we're going to look at what the Bible tells us about our continual struggle for our faith. So let's read verse 14 together. 1, 2, 3. But you must remain faithful to the things you have been taught. You know they are true, for you know you can trust those who taught you. Do you know who wrote the book of 2 Timothy? Any brave souls? It's Apostle Paul, it's not Timothy. And the recipient, the person who is receiving the letter, is a person named what? Timothy. Not that hard. Remember, I don't ask you guys hard questions, okay? And Timothy was taught the gospel message, and Timothy was the disciple of Paul, and Paul taught him many, many things. But what happens when you learn something, when you're taught something, what happens to that knowledge? It goes away, right? After you're done with your test, you start forgetting. And sometimes even before the test, you start forgetting. And same thing with our faith. I'm sure Paul has taught Timothy great many things. And Paul was saying, hey, Timothy, do not forget. Do not forget what I've taught you. And Paul says in verse 14, you must remain faithful. Our faith is not something that you are taught and you keep what you are taught for the rest of your life. We start losing it. So we have to give our effort to remain faithful, and that's Paul's admonition, that's Paul's advice to Timothy. You learn something, but you start to forget. So in order not to forget, what do you have to do? That's why we review things to refresh our memory. And oftentimes the best way of keeping what you learn and actually understanding what you learn is doing what you learn, right? Doing is such a powerful and even a more powerful way of learning and keeping and maintaining is you teach what you have learned, and you will likely not forget that. So you must practice what you learn, and sometimes you need to teach what you learn, and you learn by doing and you learn by teaching. And our faith is a lifelong process of learning, doing, and teaching. If you stop learning, if you stop practicing, if you stop teaching, you will tend to forget, and you are not going to remember what you have been taught. Let's read verse 15 together. 1, 2, 3. You have been taught holy scriptures from childhood, and they have given you the wisdom to receive the salvation that comes by trusting in Christ Jesus. The one great thing that Paul saw in Timothy was that Timothy was taught the Bible from their childhood. And if you're sitting here right now, if you have been taught the Bible from your childhood, that is actually that's a great thing that actually Paul didn't have. Paul was taught about the Bible, but he wasn't taught the knowledge about the Messiah, about Christ. And Paul actually went around persecuting or giving a hard time to the Christians. And Timothy, from his childhood, his knowledge became his wisdom. And Timothy has received salvation that comes by trusting in Christ Jesus. Do you guys know what salvation is? I know it's a rather difficult word, but salvation basically means your assurance, your sureness of getting to heaven. That's what salvation means. And do you guys have salvation? This is probably one of the most important, probably the most important question that you will have to answer in your life. Do you have salvation? And Paul is saying in the book of Timothy, Timothy, you have received salvation that comes by trusting in Christ Jesus. The most important thing in our lives is not whether you go to good college or not. It's not about whether you get a good job or not. It's not whether you get married and have a family or not. The most important thing in life is to make sure that you have salvation. And how do you have salvation? At the end of verse 15, it says, by trusting in Christ Jesus. When you trust in Jesus, when you live according to his commands, you have salvation. And that is honestly something that Paul didn't have when he was young. And Paul says, Timothy, you have salvation when you were growing up, since your childhood. And that's an awesome thing. That's a great thing. Keep at it and really make sure that everyone you teach has salvation from their childhood, because it's the most important thing in their lives. And Timothy, really make sure that you teach them. And now if you have the salvation, that is only the basis, that is only the starting point in your faith journey. It starts from the point of having salvation, and you have to continue to grow in your faith. That's why you have to continue to read the Bible, continue praying, and continue trusting Jesus Christ with your life. So in our faith, there is no such thing as a graduation. As much as you study, as much as you do your homeworks, as much as you study for your SATs, we have to really make sure that we continue to grow. And I want you to think about your time when you started, maybe the beginning of your school year. I'm sure you have grown physically, you have grown intellectually, but have you grown spiritually? Can you say that? And from this point in your life, around this time next year, can you confidently say that you have grown in your faith? Even though, we human beings, at some point in your life, at about 20 years old, you stop growing physically. But we have to make sure that we continue to grow spiritually. And in our faith, as much as I want to celebrate your graduation, I want to emphasize this point that in our faith, there's no such thing as graduation, and you will just continue to keep growing. And if you haven't grown so much during the past year, I want you to really make a resolution to grow your faith starting from this summer, so that next year around this time, you can really say, yeah, I have grown my faith. And that's a way to growing your faith and maturing in faith continuously. So that's my graduation message.